Hey everyone, this is David Rain along with Tony Galvin, and we are here to do a live to tape podcast, Not Keeping It Real. Today we'll be talking about NXT Vengence Day, as well as Wandavision, and maybe we'll have a few minutes for the new Snyder Cut trailer, the reviews of that. How are you doing today, Tony?
Doing good. Well, all things considered.
All things considered?
Yeah.
Well, COVID, right?
Well, that, and then also my power in parts of my house are going off and my internet's down, so I'm doing it with a hotspot. But nothing will deter this week's episode of our show.
Not Keeping It Real. Exactly. We have to get used to that name. We're not even 100% on the name yet, but I think Not Keeping It Real kind of, we'll be talking about anything that's not actually real, which is kind of, I know that's going to upset Jim a lot that we're saying wrestling is not real, but it's kind of not. So yeah, we'll talk about wrestling, comics, movies, television, all that kind of stuff. So I noticed you had, was it CPU something? I don't know. I'm warning me. I missed something. Sorry. All right. Why don't you go ahead and start talking
about the show? Let's get on.
Get on with the show. Episode 1. Tony.
Yes.
Tell me about Vengence today. Tell me about the opening match.
It was good. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the opening match, the Dusty Road Tag Team Classic Finals. Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez defeating Amber Moon and Shotzi Blackheart.
Yes. Now, I think the right team won here.
They're doing the big long-term storyline of eventually, Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez, eventually down the road, they're going to split up. But in the meantime, they have to show how good of a cohesive unit they are before they eventually split up and start feuding. Because we know down the road this was always going to happen when they paired Raquel as Dakota Kai's bodyguard. We've seen the Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash a million times, so.
I was just about to say that, but I get that, and I'm sure that's what's going to happen eventually, I mean, I just normally don't even think about it. A little disclosure here. Of course, I've been watching Takeover since they've been starting. NXT is a product. I've been to some shows, I've been to some takeovers. But I didn't start rewatching, like, the weekly TV until they did that awesome Halloween Havoc show. And I was like, this is like way more fun than I thought WWE was capable of producing in 2020, or really the last like 10 or 15 years as a weekly TV show. And so I still have some issues with, like, NXT was like an amazing 1 hour, 2 hours. It feels like they fill things up a little bit. But I'm on board. I'm on board with NXT right now. And I think that, Raquel Gonzalez and Dakota Kai. And Dakota Kai I'm like a really big fan of. I mean, I think she's essentially my favorite in NXT right now as women's division. Okay. Because Rhea Ripley's not there anymore, I think. But like, she hasn't been in there for weeks, so I assume, and she was at the Rumble, but we don't know.
She appears to be in limbo. I don't know what she did, if she's getting called up, or if the one thing I will say this about NXT Takeover specials, which is I love more than any other wrestling promotion in the world right now. I love that they keep the show very short. All killer, no filler. You got 6 matches, maybe 5, and that's it. And that seems like the way to go. I'm so sick of these pay-per-views that just drag on forever with all these matches. And like half the time I'm like, okay, these are the matches you've clearly built for the pay-per-view, but the rest of the stuff, it's clearly all filler. I like the NXT approach where these are the matches we built up. These are the matches you're going to see, and then that's it. You're going to be in and out. We're going to do all the important stuff, and then get going.
And there's interesting ways of doing that, too, like producing that. Like, for instance, WrestleMania is being split up again in 2 days this year. Which well, each going to be 4 hours, but like, it's WrestleMania, so whatever. But yeah, like the marathon, I get it, especially during COVID. Like, we just want good shows. Like, you don't need, I feel like the longer shows make it feel bigger when you're live, but no one live, so it's okay to do a 2.5 hour show and send everyone at home happy, because you really got the most out of your time. I think that they could, because obviously they would have like, if it was like WWE pay-per-views, they would have like the same guys like on every pay-per-view, and underexposed guys wouldn't really get on pay-per-views ever if it was a 2-hour, 2.5-hour show. But if they did pay-per-views more frequently, that wouldn't be an issue. So, and I don't think anybody would object to like, hey, not maybe doubling up WWE pay-per-views, but like 50% more would probably be fine for people. AEW, the reason why I think that their pay-per-views are so long, and I really, I'm more of an AEW guy, like I more prefer those shows. Why those are so long is that you have to pay $50 for them. Mm-hmm. So when you're, paying for the network, you're just getting it. But like AEW, it's like, we had to put a lot on this show because they're paying $50 for this, So I think I agree, but at the same time, I understand why things aren't done the way they are. And as far as WWE shows go, I think they could just do, a little, 2 hours, maybe 2.5, and just do it a little bit more frequently. And Takeover, I would love if they were a little more frequently too, honestly. But
yeah, same here. I understand what they're going for. They want to go for the old WWE model of we're only putting on 4 or 5 shows a year, so we're gonna make all of them special. The fact of the matter is that skill's so antiquated. I kind of like the idea that you're constantly building this stuff up, because then why watch the TV for 2-3 months if you're only going to really get that build for the pay-per-view for the last maybe 2-3, maybe 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, well, if you watch like WWE television, probably WCW television. Well, I don't know. Definitely WWF television back in the early 90s when they had like 4 pay-per-views a year. It's just like you really did have a lot of filler, and then like the last month before that was like probably the time to like watch it. But they don't play as well. I mean, they play well for the nostalgic factor, but they don't hold up that well. Yeah. But anyway, we're on many tangents, going way off topic. I mean, this is relative to the topic of the span of the show. You were really happy with it. But yeah, going back to it, Dakota Kai, Raquel Gonzalez, they've had like the best matches in the tournament, and you're right, they are playing something up. So now they kind of have more of like an establishing, hey, Shawn Michaels and Diesel, they won the tag team titles, right? So they're, becoming more prominent, I guess is the right word. And Ember Moon and Shotzi were perfect, like where they were at, but thrown together. So no reason for them to necessarily win the match.
Yeah, I thought the match was fine for an opener. I just feel like of all the individuals involved, I still Raquel Gonzalez is still kind of green. I noticed a couple of the spots were just kind of, I don't know, a little off. And I'm like, this is a good match, but it could be great. It's almost great, but it's not quite there. And yeah. I'm throwing in on her. Like maybe that's not fair, but that's where it seemed to be for me. I could be wrong, but that's just my opinion.
I agree. I think their semi match was like much better with Casey Cantarizzo. I'm not and Kaden Carter.
Your guess is as good as mine. I know who you're talking about, but I don't know how to pronounce her name either. Oh, Brain, you still there?
Assistant wrestler in NXT and has been for years. Did I go out for a while?
It's probably my connection because I'm going off.
Okay, we'll let it go out. Johnny Gargano was amazing, and he was wrestling Kushida, who has been beating Johnny Gargano in a bunch of matches that weren't for the North American title. But I still feel like they have no clue what to do, Kushida. That's my general feeling. And now that he's no longer undefeated, they're in more trouble in that capacity. But I was glad for Gargano to get a clean win and kind of like move on, from, I mean, he lost a lot to Leon Ruff, who I liked. I like that whole angle, but still, you got to reestablish Shawnee. He's like one of your main event guys. So I don't know. Would you? I really like the match. I think personally, I thought it was like the best match of the night. But
yeah,
what
going
did you
back
think
to
of
the opener, I feel like this should have been the opener of the show. This would have been a great way to kick off the show. You could have had a great, fast, busy pace to get set for the entire night. The match was good. I agree with you. They sort of seemed like aimless with the direction of Kushida. it's just one of those things where they signed him because he's kind of, he's kind of a name. He's a really good wrestler, but at the same time, it's like, well, we still don't know quite what we're going to do with the guy. Because so much of him and his character is wrapped up in what he's done previously in New Japan. So I'm just like, well, I don't know if they want to repackage him or keep him the way he is. But right now, he does really just seem like that awkward, like, we don't know what to do with you, but we're going to give you this match on our Takeover special so we can feel like we're getting our mileage. And also, he's a great wrestler. So at the same time, it's like, okay, even though we sort of just threw this match together, it's still really good.
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. And I love that it was clean in the end. But now the next match, MSK against Grizzled Young Veterans, in the finals of the Dusty Rhodes Classic. So I had a lot of thoughts about this match. I got exposed to MSK through Impact. I randomly went to some Impact tapings a few years back, and I've also seen a few pay-per-views at that time. And they were just like lower mid-card guys, like in Impact. So you know what that means. Yeah, Impact of like 2 or 3 years ago isn't quite the Kenny Omega shows up once in a while show that it is now. Impact's actually been having some good shows lately. Not weekly, maybe, but like their pay-per-views. But yeah, in Impact, about 2-3 years ago, they couldn't make it past the mid-card. So I've seen them have some flip-floppy matches that I enjoyed, like in PWG. But I didn't really think they had legs to get to this level. This is obviously the biggest win of their career. So Grizzled Young Veterans, I've always been like, oh, Grizzled Young Veterans, they're super boring. Like, I don't know, but they had the best match of their career as well. Their whole look, to me, is just like very boring and like nothing going on here, nothing to see. And their matches have been reflective of that at times, but I thought they had a really good match here. To me, it's like the WWE doesn't know how to book them because it's the second time they've lost in the finals. And I'm not saying they should have won, but it definitely tells me that NXT is just like, we're never going to go with this team. They're never going to be like our top team. Mm-hmm. But the only way they'll be our top team is if we run out of teams, basically. That's what I got the impression of. And they'll be like they'll be there, but that's pretty much it. They got a bigger size, so maybe they'll just move to SmackDown and they'll wander around aimlessly, but or Raw. But what did you think?
Wandering aimlessly, that seems to describe about 90% of the WWE roster. So
yeah. I don't think they can move them into like the brand, but that doesn't mean it would be a good thing for them or anyone else. It would just be like, oh, we like these guys more than your other NXT guys because they're bigger. So anyway, but yeah, great match, and and it's very close to like being the best match of the night. I thought it was really good. Mm-hmm. So what did you think?
This was okay. Okay. I didn't like the match as much as you did. I just thought, I'm like, as someone who doesn't regularly watch NXT TV, I'm like, Grizzled Young Vets, I heard of them before. M3K, I've never heard of before. So I'm just like, I just presume the Grizzled Young Vets are going to win. And I presume this win is sort of their way of putting them on the map. That way they can give them something. So going forward, they can, I guess this is their way of saying, okay, we're going to try to do something new. This is a bit of a push going forward. So let's see if they can live up to our expectations, basically.
Right, and it kind of like logically booking, like if they can book them as undefeated between now and the next Takeover when they get the tag team titles, hot babyface team, heel team, it's the easiest way to book things. So, and why not start them off hot and see where it goes? So I don't know. But you've never been exposed to them before. Was it once they got into NXT, that was like your first time watching them, or?
Yeah, I mean, this is going back to what you mentioned earlier. You mentioned how you got back recently into NXT through the Halloween Havoc special. This is for me. When you said, "Hey, Tony, I want to watch this NXT special," for me, it's like I haven't watched NXT in forever. So the idea that they're just going in cold. I know the shows are always good, so that's why I didn't really protest too much because I'm like, it's going to be a fun, good time. You're going to get 5-6 matches, and they're all going to be really good. So I figured, why the hell not? So, but you did some of the video packages that help get people like me up to speed. But for the most part, it's like, no, I'd really never heard about these tag teams before.
Wow. Okay. Cool. Well, going into the next match, Io Shirai defeating Toni Storm and Mercedes Martinez, which I think like everybody was just across the board was like, oh, this is the match where even though I'm like such a big Johnny Gargano fan, this was a match that I was like, oh, this is going to be the match. And yeah, they didn't get a lot of time. They got like 12 minutes.
Well, that's part of the problem with the match too.
Right. You didn't. I mean, you got the least amount of time of hitting the matches to shine. So that's a problem. There might have been something that we don't know about, like a minor injury or something. Like to make that decision, there has to be something, right? But
something from the undercard maybe went long, and they knew the main events were going to give this X amount of time to, so they may have just been cut on time.
True.
Which you think on a show that's so short, everything would have more time to play out, but whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's their fucking network, right? So, Io, I'm a fan of. I'm a fan of all these women, really. I mean, I think Tony's like a little overrated, but it just didn't really work out like that well. Like it was good, which on a takeover, especially a big title match, is like supposed to be better than good. Mm-hmm. Like 3-star affair.
You're right. In some ways, this did feel like just a TV match. There were a couple instances, especially with Io Shirai, jumping off the scaffolding. But aside from that, you're right. It kind of just did feel like a TV main event that we're gonna give maybe 10 minutes to. It was fine and everything, but at the same time, it's like, well, this wasn't the NXT classic that I'm so used to hearing about and seeing in the past.
And we are so spoiled when Takeover is on the marquee, like it's just like we want it all to be perfect. If it's not perfect, it's like was it mediocre? There's certainly somewhere in between, but and then we go to the main event.
Wait, hold on before we move on. Something that must be addressed, and I didn't know from not watching NXT TV, and the package didn't really help. I had no idea why this is a three-way. Why was Mercedes Martinez there? I'm not someone who is not keeping up with the product, whatever. But just out of the blue, she's just thrown into this match, and it's like I would love to see Io Shirai versus Toni Storm in a one-on-one match. And I presume this was done with, especially when you consider the finish, where neither Toni or Io Shirai were pinned. So what's the story of her being just thrown in the match? Because I never heard of her, and I had no idea why she was in this championship match.
You never heard of Mercedes Martinez?
The name rings familiar, but it's like...
Okay. Yeah, that's like the whole thing with Mercedes Martinez, and I liked her. Don't get me wrong, like I'm not knocking her, but the whole thing with Mercedes Martinez, she's kind of like Sarah Del Rey, where like she's been around like forever, and like probably 15 years, I'm guessing, maybe a little more. But she's been around for a really long time. She's a veteran. And finally, she got a shot in the WWE a couple of years ago. She was NXT for a little while. Then they moved her to Raw. And I heard from what I don't watch that. And she was never on a pay-per-view. So basically, from what I hear, like they moved her right back to NXT because like basically they had no good plans with her. And a lot of internet fans, a lot of the people online were like, thank God, because she's fucking great. But like you don't want to be on that show, man. And she's basically a reputation. She's like she can be fit into a title match based off of reputation alone in any given event, just with the smart marks. But here we are, and I know you biblically talk to me about Dave Meltzer, and I know you're a smart mark, so. I'm kind of surprised you didn't know about her, but yeah, like she's really good, and I don't know what the storyline reason was to make it a triple threat because I guess I
think the storyline thing is they have WrestleMania plans for Toni and Io Shirai, so they're like, okay, we'll do a three-way, we'll have Mercedes eat the pin, so we can do the match, come Mania weekend,
right? And well, actually, and I'll remind you, too, because it was a totally different gimmick. It was a very different look. But at some point, and I think it was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know which one it was. But the Mae Young tournament that they do, probably the Mae Young Classic, I don't remember. But the finals was Toni Storm defeating Io Shirai. So they have had single matches before together, which they did know on NXT TV, I think, this week. So it reminded me, like, oh yeah, but yeah, so I think they probably are going to go in that direction, and nothing wrong with that, right? So I don't know. You do need somebody in the middle.
In the intermediate, I was like, why am I getting this match? I don't understand the build. I know where they're going, but I would have just appreciated a one-on-one match.
Right. Well, and if it is a match that they're going with a takeover, obviously the company feels that there's more there in the singles match that you're putting over than the triple threat, right? Like in long term, like because that next takeover is going to be the WrestleMania takeovers usually. But anyway, so now we'll go into the main event. So Pete Dunne against Finn Balor, and I was like of the mind that like, why would they put this match? First of all, I was really looking forward to this match, and Pete Dunne's great. But I was like, why would they put a guy who has not a lot of build, but a guy that is like everybody knows is an amazing wrestler, deserves probably more than he gets. So I was of the mind, everybody that I know was like, Finn Balor's easily winning. I was of the mind like, maybe Pete Dunne's going to win, it'll shock everyone, and then they can have him versus Kyle O'Reilly, because obviously they're going for a title match with Kyle O'Reilly coming up, and it could be Pete Dunne versus Kyle O'Reilly, or maybe some kind of triple threat. And we didn't get that, but we did get like a really great match as expected. And Finn Balor went over. And then, let's just talk about the match first. So, what did you think about the match, Tony?
It was pretty much what I expected when you put, Finn Balor and Pete Dunne in there. It's like, okay, not that I hated the match, but it's just like in my mind when I imagine the two of them having a really good NXT pay-per-view main event, I'm like, it pretty much lived up to the expectations. That's not a disappointment. That's like having, a 5-star steak and, you're expecting it all week, and by the time you finally get it, it's like, well, okay, that's what it is. That's what you wanted, and that's what it is. So no real complaints, no real notes, but at the same time, it's still really good. Going back to your notes earlier about what you said about this match kind of seems like just out of the blue. I get the feeling just like the co-main event, it's just like, okay, this is last show before Mania kind of thing that we kind of we're going to throw out there. Just the match is going to be good, but at the same time, storyline-wise, in the grand scheme, it doesn't make a ton of sense, but we're just going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at it, this was a takeover, which, like, I mean, I've seen like perfect scores, like 10 out of 10, like I've heard people say that it was like, and these are like not just fans, but they're like, journalists or whatever, like one of the best takeovers ever. And I don't quite agree with that, but if you look at the booking of it, it's like, yeah, okay, so you got the match where MSK wins, and they're going to probably challenge for the tag title, so that'll be big. Then you have the women's match that'll probably end up Toni Storm and Io Shirai, and this is kind of building up to that. And then this world title match is just kind of there so we can do the angle at the end. And so it is kind of just like a takeover to build up to a bigger takeover. And
it's like, in a perfect world, we wouldn't get these kind of shows, but at the same time, in-ring wise, we got a really good show, so it's really hard to complain. But it's just one of those things to where it's just like everybody kind of knows what the show is, and because of that, the show as a whole, as far as the long term, the show feels kind of unimportant.
Right. Now the angle at the end, I love that they did like the fake credit right at the end, and then they went with the angle. Yeah, so I really think Undisputed Era needed this, because I've been a fan of Undisputed Era, the wrestlers that compose them, like over a decade, and they've all been wrestling each other or in the same group. They've always been together. And I think it says something about NXT booking wise, not the matches. When the last 3 Takeover War Games matches were the Undisputed Era versus a new team. Like they're, that's just the first 2, because they were like, they were heel team at the time, and then they're facing like 4 random baby faces that they've wronged somehow. Like those were way too similar, that I'm glad that they turned the group face so they could do something new and that's what I'm looking for, to like them to do something new with these amazing, talented wrestlers like Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Roderick Strong, Bobby Fish, the whole group I love. But like the booking wise, they're just like, it's lazy booking. They just put them out there, they give them good music, and then it's just like, okay, like they'll get themselves over. But it's like they're not really thinking like, well, are we just repeating the same cycles over and over again? And I know maybe it looks a little bit like, oh, well, maybe they're repeating the same cycle of Adam Cole versus Kyle O'Reilly. I don't think that's what they're doing really. I think they're just separating them. But you have to have the match. You will have that match, and I think we'll get Adam Cole versus Kyle O'Reilly versus Finn Balor at the next Takeover, and that'll be like an amazing match. Sometimes you can put up with like pedestrian booking just to get you to that amazing match that you're like, oh my god, like I'm just so glad that they're having this. So, and that the wrestling speaks for itself. But any thoughts on the turn? Or
you're right. It's one of those things there. It just kind of ran its life cycle. I'm glad going forward now we're gonna get matches with these guys because they work so good. You have to imagine when they're working matches against each other, they're gonna be just as good. So it's one of these things where like you kind of knew the writing was on the wall. It's like faction's been together forever. They've done just about everything. It makes sense that eventually they're just going to break up and start feuding with each other.
So I know we're going to keep these pods like under 40 minutes. So let's just get out of Takeover. I know we have about 10 minutes, so we can talk about WandaVision. I don't think we're getting to the Snyder trailer, but there's plenty of time to talk about that. And we'll talk a little bit about WandaVision. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about WandaVision next week as well. So I'll just ask, like, have you been keeping up with the MCU? Like, I know you watched this, but like, what were your general first impressions? Because I'll just openly come out and say that I will put over anything MCU, like pretty much.
Oh, okay. Because
So,
I'm just like, okay. When they first released the 2 episodes, part of me was excited, and then when I started watching it, it's like, oh, this is why they put 2 episodes, right out the gates. It's like you had the first episode, and I thought it's fun, it's cute, but I don't know if I want the whole show to be about this. And that's really what my thoughts were after I watched the first episode. I'm like, okay, fine, I get the premise. And then the second episode, it's like, this whole show isn't going to be this, is it? And I knew from watching the end, they're like, okay, we're going somewhere with this, but it just feels like MCU on a budget, and I don't know if I like that going forward because it's just like there's so many things that I've grown accustomed to. The fact that it's more important than the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Obviously, that show was kind of, I don't know, a weird thing unto itself, but I don't know if budget MCU works for me.
Right. So, but you watched how many episodes in are you? So I don't spoil anything.
I watched the latest episode, so I know everything that's happened already.
Okay. Like, I guess it's budget MCU, but it doesn't feel like budget MCU yet to me because they have to, logistically budget wise, they had to, like the first few episodes were shot like so mostly, so you did have a shorter budget, but once Wanda's like out of like her Westview, out of her bubble, then it's like totally like an MCU movie. I don't know, to me, but there's nothing big CGI happening, so I guess they're just I haven't really noticed. I grew up on Nick at Night sitcoms. So while I kind of, after watching the Falcon and Winter Soldier trailer, I was kind of like, for a lot of people, I'm wondering why they didn't go with that first.
Yeah, because really going forward, I'm like,
looks exactly like you would expect it to look like.
The cool MCU thing that I've grown accustomed to. This big budget action thing that's, maybe it's not high concept, but going forward, it's going to be just a really good fun time. It has a premise, has a villain, has everything going forward. I'm like, this is what I wanted. I can't imagine showing something like this on the Super Bowl. I don't know if they did it last year, but this is more something that people have grown accustomed to. This WandaVision thing, it's a cute, side thing, but the idea that, following The Mandalorian on Disney Plus kind of feels like this is a bit of a letdown.
I haven't watched season 2 of Mandalorian, so I will say this because we only have about like 5 or 6 more minutes. I guess Mark Hamill, I already heard, like, for spoiler, like, Mandalorian, like, Luke Skywalker's in the end, because that's what the spoiler that I heard and most people heard. So I know that when they were, Elizabeth Olsen was interviewed, like, hey, is there going to be, like, a big surprise at the end of WandaVision, like, similar to the level of, like, Luke Skywalker being in it, like, and she's like, yes, it will be. So, and I think some people are wondering, like, well, what's really bringing on all of this, and we'll talk about it more later, but, is it Mephisto that's like orchestrating Wanda to just kind of go off a rocker and, like, take over everything in her grief and loss of vision? Or is it Magneto, or, like, which is, like, I think is just far out, like, that's way less likely. I kind of think it's like, if it's not like a big villain reveal, I think it's just Wanda.
Yeah,
She's in, like, Doctor Strange, and, like, and if you read the comics, I mean, maybe mostly she's portrayed as, like, a protagonist, but she's been an antagonist too. And I think that it's just, like, Wanda and her grief, and what happens when you get, like, that much grief in your life and that much depression. Like, sometimes you turn into a fucking asshole. Sometimes you start doing things that are wrong. And I think that might be going on. That's my big theory for that.
Yeah, you can tell this whole series, especially from the premise, they were kind of, mining the source material, House of M for ideas. There's kind of a few other things that they've, maybe Pleasant Hill, they just decided to mine some ideas from. But yeah, I think this may have just been just like in the comics before earlier, where she's just having a bit of a mental breakdown. Vision died, her brother died. It's and they've established that in the comics anyway, that her powers, they're reality based. So whenever she uses it, it does take a mental toll on her, and that they could be going that forward. But judging from the bit they did with her and her eyes, makes me think there's something more to it. This isn't just she's having a breakdown. This is her way of coping. I think going forward, they've established that someone's pulling the strings.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of, like, and again, some people think it's Mephisto because, like, once Quicksilver showed up, he started encouraging her more. So is it really Quicksilver, or is it, like, Mephisto in a Quicksilver-like form? And so there's definitely a bit of that going on. As somebody who's, like, watched a ton of old school TV, I loved, like, how they opened the series. It made sense to me in a way that, like, that they do this first, because like, okay, you got the added sell of, like, Vision died, so now we get to see Vision again. So that appeals to a lot of fans. And then also, like, Marvel, the cinematic universe to Marvel, like, streamlined Marvel, is now on television. So here's, like, kind of like our tribute to television over the years and our bridge into this world. And I dug all of the tributes, and while it was super slow, and now that we're getting stuff, I'm like, this is really cool too. And I'm really into what they're doing. I know that the last 3 episodes will be 1-hour episodes. And so I think we kind of got, like, a lot of our thoughts out about this, but I will say we are going to review, each episode, and probably talk a little more about what's going on in WandaVision in each episode of our coming up. So next week we'll actually start with WandaVision, to give some more considerable time to that, then starting off with the wrestling talk, and then we'll go into the wrestling talk about Elimination Chamber, which I guess, since, have you been keeping up with these WWE pay-per-views at all? It sounds like you were not. Yeah, so I don't keep up with the weekly TV, and you can't make me. But I do think the pay-per-views are worth watching, because, hey, I can invest in, like, 2 to 4 hours of WWE TV a month, not including NXT. I can't invest any more than that because of, like, how bad the product is. So, and, hopefully they'll give me the best, so, but I know that we're running short on time. Tony, is there anything that you want? I'll let you do the outro since I did the intro.
No, just stay tuned. We're hoping to make this a weekly thing. I mean, it's one of these things to where we're sort of, technical limits right now, but I'm sure in the future we're going to work on all these things, make them a lot better. we'll be able to talk a lot more wide range of things. But going forward, I like the premise of this show. I like the things we're talking about. So going forward, stay tuned and have a good time. And see.
Okay. So